The following story is meant for mature audiences. Discretion is advised. Courage, above all things, is the first quality of a warrior. Karl von Clausewitz. Chapter 1. Unforeseen Consequences. August 1st, 1995. The rain poured down on the streets of Nurmia, Japan. Every few seconds, a cherry at the end of my cigarette burned orange to give my later than 5 o'clock shadow a sharp blood mandarin hue as I walked into the uncertainty of my future. My hands were only a little cold behind the charcoal black rough leather gloves as I drew away the dart to exhale the cloud of cancerous smoke. It trailed into the air in a haze until it disappeared among the gray skies above me, thinking on the day's events. The wind was strong at my back as the clocks ticked over to midnight. A long night overdue to be over, my ride skipping out to go drinking with the rest of my cohorts. A mixed blessing to collect my thoughts. I needed to think about the meeting and how I should either salvage it or just get my plane ticket ready to go back to Seattle. The name's Archer. That's all you really need. I was on government business in Japan, a notable but low-key conference of those who work on the darker side of the gray lines of work wetter than the rain pouring down on me at the time. I've been to a lot of places in the world, strange and dangerous all around, places you wouldn't like. No one in their right mind for that matter. Iraq, Nigeria, Somalia, Colombia, Sudan, Sierra Leone, to name far more than I really should. I lived on and off in Japan, but I was actually born on a military base just outside Tokyo. A Navy brat somehow turned Army degenerate and then, well, it gets classified after that. For the sake of your own curiosity, the business I was on had to do with a special project. Nothing involving aliens before you get too far out into tinfoil hatland. Just a joint effort between NATO nations. Due to the growing popularity of global terrorism, there was a push to put together some combined force, spearheaded by Japan of all places. They were looking to lift some of their restrictions on their constitution with US approval. We were looking for more joint training and deployment points in the area. I was here as an advisor, translator, and possibly one of the chain of command of this little outfit. We were working on names while we organized our candidates. I put forward Specialized Tactical Anti-Terrorist Interception Command, otherwise known as Static Force. When you got two shiny new captain's bars on your shoulders, it's amazing what ends up getting jotted down on the drawing board. The rain was starting to die off as I reflected on the meeting. Not often did much get done when you got 3 different chains of command from 5 different countries trying to hash out who foots the bill, let alone who is going to do what. The droplets pattered lighter and lighter on my head as I saw the clouds thinning out above me. I pulled off my hood to get a good cold breeze going across my scruffy chin and running my hand through my long on top hair to brush out a few bangs from my field of vision. The sides were cut down to the quick to keep in regulation with the beret I had to sport around sometimes, though it looked a little off. Making my way across the middle of the street, I was about to drag off the last of my smoke when I heard a crackling in my ear of the world around me suddenly changing for the stranger. I had a low-profile earpiece headset on, connected to my cell phone in my pocket that began to make some weird high-pitched whistling noise. Sounds like long-drawn tweeze winding up before dropping along with what I could only decipher as digital information downloading feedback. The streetlights around me started to flicker. My watch's display flashed in randomized numbers. Electrical interference? From what? Looking down the street to my left, I saw building flash lights in random patterns. Traffic lights flick from stop, slow, and go at random. When I looked up to the sky, that's what stopped me in mid-step in the middle of the street. Above me was not the normal starry sky that I expected as the clouds parted. It looked foreign. Bands of what looked like stretches of barcodes mixed with DNA sequences unraveled along the sky. The backdrop to it looked to the striking similarities of the northern lights, except far more detail, and coated the whole sky with faint greens and bright blues. When I craned my neck up, I could have sworn I made out what looked like continents, oceans, and even city lights on a world I could not be seeing right above me. My cigarette drooped from my lips, fell from it, and made its way down to the wet streets below me. The second set of lights came from my right, my eyes darting over after a second. Headlights. Horns sounded. Speeding truck. I'm dead. I was then struck by not the vehicle barreling down at me to my painful but welcome surprise. Instead, a flash of robes out of the corner of my eye picked me up in a tackle at full sprinting speed into a bone-straining hit. Ripped off the ground, my cigarette fell to the pavement as we sailed back towards the sidewalk. I felt my chest almost cave in before my back hit the cement with a slam and a skid up over the lip of the sidewalk. The only reason I didn't feel the snap of my spine was my concealed Kevlar armor under my jacket and shirt that deadened the blow. Hurt like hell as I rolled over backwards 3 times, slamming my head on a brick wall. I slumped to the side with my vision twisting for a few moments. I heard my cigarette hiss out in a puddle. Curled on the ground, I heard another voice giving a slight groan, pulling my knees in as I drew my hand back to see if there was any blood. Yep, blood. I shook my head as I barely missed a concussion, realizing I had flown from the middle of the street to the center line all the way back to the corner of the sidewalk. The low wall with the barred spike fence around it symbolically guarding a large residential building. Heightened View Terrace, in fact, as I read from the sign. I looked around to see who had saved my life so suddenly. He was even stranger than the sky was. I thought he was wearing a very baggy trench coat, but he was actually wearing some type of monk's robes. It was pretty basic, but it had some prestige to it. A solid leather belt around the middle, and some weird wrappings around his hands like fight wraps. The short brown hair almost spiked, but he had a very long braided ponytail down his back. Around his neck looked like a religious symbol, more like a seal of some kind with the crosses and shield and really weird looking symbols that looked halfway between kanji and random computer symbols. He looked in his mid-30s, younger 30s for sure, fair complexion, and almost impossibly clean-shaven. On his back was something I was a little more concerned with, a very large scabbard for what looked like a massive broadsword. Medieval in nature, a cleaver of men if you will, and that just made it all the more confusing. The robed man stood up to his feet as I got to my knees, squinting through the moderate pain. "Are you hurt?" he asked as he leaned toward me. I shook my head as I got up, using the fence to fully get to my feet. I brushed myself off of the grime and water as the truck that nearly hit me sped down the road, as if nothing had happened for him. Must have panicked and gunned it to avoid my foot up his ass if he got out, if he even did see me. "You must get off the streets, it isn't safe." He pointed away. "Nowhere ever is safe," I answered with a shrug. "Thought my number was up with that truck. What's with the getup?" He looked confused at my statement, narrowly avoiding death, and not one sign of panic he was probably thinking was a little strange. Been nearly killed a few times, this one was just a little more surprising, and in the soonest retrospect, very anticlimactic. I reached for my pack and flicked out another cigarette. I was still expecting an answer. "You know, swords aren't exactly legal to carry around here," I said, very well of the hypocrisy of what I had under my tactical jacket. "Didn't think Japan had hema with European leanings, but do you know what was going on with the sky?" "Don't you understand? You need to get out of here. I'm trying to—" "Run away, Jedi," a smooth voice called out from the end of the street. "Time to stop running now." I looked back just over a block away, walking towards what seemed to be a photo negative of the man I was speaking to, but the smile on his face was enough to make my senses start to sharpen up to a fight. The robes he wore were almost the same as the man calls Jedi, except they were black with gray trimmings. They were torn and faded at the cuffs, collar, and bottoms, worn by time, but it looked almost intentional. I would have thought they were twins, but the flesh on his face was a palish gray, and his hair a solid white sheen against the streetlights. What pierced me were his eyes, blood red. The smile was sinister as he walked up all on his own, but with every step he took, the ground started to form a thick soupy fog that stretched up behind him like a misty cloak, stretching out further and further as he walked. "Who's your friend?" He pointed at me. "Seems a bit old for someone you might need." "He has nothing to do with me, Raelius." The guy laughed with a twinge of madness as I started to slip myself into a defensive posture, hands slowly reaching behind my back. Instinct started to kick on as that dark ether that formed along the street started to take human-like shapes. My mind was trying to process all this insanity, but training was overriding the crazy for practicality. My hand slipped around the hilt of my belt knife. "He's next to you, and that's enough. And you're not going to risk your mission to defend him now, are you?" I didn't answer the threat, as those forms started to shift up like pulling themselves out of a tar-like substance. The smoky cloud beginning to peel away to reveal similarly dressed beings, only they had hoods and tight wrapped masks around their faces. The eyes I still saw, glowing and looking right at me with a murderous intent I knew well. Jedi stepped in front of me, reaching behind his back and drawing out that monstrous blade in one pull. The silver steel flashed out as the skies cleared and the lights returned to just flickering in and out. "I'll hold him off. Run, you fool!" And I couldn't run away now, trapped on the street corner, surrounded. I had anticipated a mugging or an ambitious kidnapping, maybe, but all my equipment was under my poncho. The knives they had all looked like they were made to gut crocodiles, halfway between a kitchen knife crossed with a cleaver. The end was shaped like a fishhook, complete with barbs. The pummels had spikes on the ends too. Nasty, but they probably got the job done like they were looking to do to me and this Jedi guy. My heart rate was now through the roof, veins on my neck throbbing, but I kept my composure. The tan monk stood with his sword out, ready to defend a not-so-defenseless stranger as we thought. They quickly circled around us, my avenue of escape not there yet. I looked around for a path out, fences and walls in my way for the moment, but nothing I couldn't vault over. "I'll go right and draw them away. I'm sorry for this." "Don't be. Wrong place to be tonight." Jedi glanced back at that, again confusion crossing his gaze. You're not afraid? How?" "Death comes for all of us," I answered, as 2 of the dozen were working out who would lead on me first. "It's only a matter of how in time." "Enough of this, kill Jedi!" Raelius ordered with a point of his longer version of their blades. Jedi bolted right like a blur of fabric and flashing steel. 10 of them chased after. Raelius pursued the casual stride, while the others like hungry jackals after a meal. A battle cry followed those that pursued, long howling cries of rage echoing through the streets as they vanished after him. Raelius walked calmly up the street, after them in no hurry, his metal boots clanking away as he ran his thumb up his twisted sword. The 2 remaining circled around me, closing the gap with their blades above their heads, dancing their steps side to side in joyful anticipation to sink them into me. I heard them chuckling like hyenas. Raelius looking over at me for a moment in the middle of the street. He too was curious since my expression had not changed. "Human, you fear nothing? No begging, no bargaining? Not even a word of why?" I didn't answer. What was I going to say, really? I glanced between him and his 2 remaining creatures of my now real nightmares closing in, keeping tabs with every one of their steps. What I returned to him was a glare. He stopped mid-pace. Raelius didn't respond to it well. Insult bled across his demeanor. "Kill him. I don't want things like him running around." I drew a sneer at my face as he continued now at a faster pace, wanting to catch up with his prey. The blood eyes looked away finally, and I looked to the 2 still 20 feet out, orbiting me. A slight wind kicked up as my feet settled on the ground, weight shifting side to side as my breath drew in hard in and out. Adrenaline was making my face tingle a bit. Fingers twitch, and the ones on my knife flex harder into the rubber handle. I looked towards my 2 attackers, and they both halted in place with my expression alone. "A warning," I spoke finally with a raised finger. "I haven't begged for my life yet. It's because I don't fear losing it. How about you?" "Death is here now," one spoke back. "Embrace it." "Come and get it." My attackers stood perking upright with the surprise of my statement, looking between themselves bewildered. They must have been used to seeing fear being the primary reaction, or at least the outward appearance of it, and finding none with me. They charged nonetheless, one in front of the other in a lunging sprint, knives poised to sink into me when they got that close. I wasn't going to let them. Firing off like a bullet, my cigarette snapped from my fingers in a flick and shot right into the leading physical apparition's face. In reality, all was a blur, but the distinct strike of the smearing embers crashed into his eye socket, burning into a splattering of burning tobacco. My knife flashed out, the fresh, stone-sharpened blade slicing through my poncho all the way down with ease as I flashed forward as the attacker flinched. I ducked under his blind slash, and my edge severed right through the mask around his face, his neck, and split all of it open. My feet twisted, knife flipping into an underhand hold. In one rip, I hauled my slice rain protection off and tossed it into the second attacker. The instant batting away of the rubber liner came as I knew it would, but it used both arms to do it. Both ends of the blade clear of my attacked trajectory, I leapt forward and with a sick crunch through the ribcage, the bottom of my fist dug right into where I hoped his heart was at the top of the blade, buried in it. That moment of silence, the first opponent hitting the ground in a roll, my fist twisted over with a distinct popping crackles as it did breaking it. its eyes with their black pupils quivering over in the direction of my own look of indifference as I ripped the blade out. My adversary choked a yelp, my boot rose up, and I delivered a door-busting kick right where I stabbed. My impact felt like I was hitting a dense sandbag, but it still lurched back, wobbled down to the ground, clawing at its chest. The stuck one babbled weak, incoherent nonsense, writhing like it was a hot plate on the ground. I pulled down the zipper on my jacket, and with a smooth pull came out my service pistol from my shoulder holster. It snapped in the direction of the formed being as it gripped its throat with one clawed hand holding tight. The shadowed being looked into my eyes from behind the barrel. "Embrace this," I spat back its own words. The gunshot rang out as I squeezed the trigger. 2 more after that, to be sure. The /1 crumpled down, but instead of a familiar pink mist from the exit, the hit caused a spark of embers, his ash-colored flesh crackling with bright fractures of bright black light purple. His head shattered with a single hole after the third, and his head cracked open in a fire burst of orange like a sledgehammer to glass. A neon purple smoke and fire surged out from his neck. The rest of his body, armor and cloth, obliterated itself before my eyes. The remnant chunks churned away in a twirling vortex and into oblivion in a few seconds along with an invisible wind. I took my hand away from my eyes as the heat singed me, blinking slowly to what I just saw. What the hell just happened? A growl came from behind me, my head whipping around along with my pistol aimed. The stuck one was getting up slowly, the same black-lit glow throbbing from his chest through the cloth. It was radiating into itself, shrinking and snuffing out, leaving only a single line of puncture and a mangled scar. "It's not over yet, human!" It screamed at me, running. I instinctively fired each round of my punching a set of holes you could fit under a playing card into his chest, but it wasn't doing a damn thing. Out the back, I caught the black dust flying out where his spine was, and I worked my way up to get to his head. A heartbeat before he got into blade's reach, I swapped grip on my blade and clanged a strike off the incoming knife, parrying and slashing down the bend of his arm. It barely affected him despite I should have cut through his arm clean at the elbow. A limp but whipping flail of an aimed cut from him missed. His arm snapped back into place, but my boot crunched his knee with a rippling crackle, buckling his leg. He jabbed and swung hard, my blade parrying the strike off. I shot more rounds into his back, going for the head, but he flinched out of the way until the slide action on my gun stayed back, telling me I was dry. I flipped the gun in my hand to be a stubby club for the second and cracked it off his face, sending him staggering. No time or hands to get a reload as I saw him wobble back up, breathing heavy with all the glowing cracks all over his body that I could see through the fabric. 10 of 15 in him and all center mass, and he was still functioning with no worse for wear now, with a robe looking closer to a cheese grater than clothing. "What the fuck are you?" "Darkness and will given meaning. Now your demise in physical form." He twirled his blade around, trying to fancy me into a mistake. I flicked my blade and parried it off and cross-slash flurried him right back. He wasn't concerned for his well-being, taking hits with his forearms and even to his chest at times. I carved him up every chance I found. He didn't care. I got in an upper swing from my pistol butt under his chin, spun on the spot, and snapped the spin kick right to his face. My foot hit with all the intention of taking his head off, but it was like hitting a wooden post, my momentum ending in that second. I landed, my feet scooted me back into a defensive stance, his face having small fissures of glowing purple, on his face slowly shrinking away. He was slowing down the more I heard him, at least. I spat off into the ground. He was getting more frustrated than I was. I beckoned him forward with my knife hand to taunt and exacerbate that. "Come on, I don't got all night." Dashing in with a snarl, our blades twanged off each other. Slashes went wide on both sides as I caught an opening. I slashed his wrists with my blade, twisted it over his wrists, but both of our blades ended up slipping off into the ground. He unceremoniously shoved me, and up and over I went like I was thrown from a speeding car. My back clanged off the metal fence of the wall, the entire thing vibrating all the air out of my lungs. My vision again twisted in my head as he charged, my arms shooting out sideways, grabbing the bars tight. In a feat of strength, kick of my feet off the ground, I flipped up at my hips at the pivot point, using his incoming torso to run up and leave him with a whipping steel toe chin kick on the way by. I landed on the top of the stone wall part of the other side, catching the top bar just below the spiked heads. The hit staggered him, but he leapt from 10 feet away on a direct angle up at me, fingers outstretched to claw me in half. I jumped backwards, twisting in air and wrapping my arms around his neck as he grabbed me. Too bad he didn't see me clear the fence while his neck was in line with the dulled points of the speared metal decorations. I felt flesh give way, but a lot more resistance was met on the way down and before the first line of steel between the point and the bottom of the decorative spearhead. Gruesomely, it stabbed through his neck now, and 3 inches of spikes were impaled through it. His shoulders in line have 2 others on either side as well, impaled firmly on the black painted metal. I held onto him as he writhed and gargled in my arms, keeping him in place with a headlock. One arm loose, I reached my hand into my jacket and pulled my spare magazine out from a pouch inside, slamming it into the exposed butt of the pistol in my left fist. A clawed hand came around to my face as I yanked my 9mm out from my hand, clicked the action forward, and jammed it right to his temple. "Heal this!" I fired 1 round point blank and he burst into the same flame and dust. As he faded from existence without no more of a sound, I slipped off right through the loose sand-like substance and hit the ground with my back of my head chipping off the edge of the stone wall. A jolt of pain shot all the way to the tip of my nose. I came to a stop on the ground ass first in a seated position in the dirt. I picked myself off the flower bed and the bush I had crushed, instinctively picking up the shell casings on the ground and putting it in my pocket. I slowly made my way over the fence, the steel points looking a little burned, but no one was going to notice. More likely the tulips I had crushed with my backside. I landed on the ground, looking around cautiously and listening to any sirens or witnesses retrieving the knife I had lost. Nothing so far. I collected the casings off the ground, pain in my body numbly throbbing away as the toll of this insane fight was adding up. I was about to make a run for it when I saw Raelius at the end of the block again. I stood off with him with my pistol snapped in his direction, shoulders square and gun aimed, to wait for him to come forward just a little bit more. Raelius shook his head side to side, slowly in bewilderment, my blade under my pistol pointing forward as he walked toward me, the 1/4-inch gouges in the blade apparent like a small torch sliced through the metal in my lower peripheral vision. "How?" I wasn't interested in a conversation. I pulled the trigger instead. Multiple times. The rounds hit him right between the eyes within a 1/4 of an inch. His head whipped backward, twisting away as I walked forward, landing every shot somewhere on his skull till the magazine ran empty again. I flicked away the magazine and loaded it in with the last one I had from inside of my jacket. Raelius didn't fall over or burst into unearthly flames as I had hoped. He turned around to face me again, and only small gouges on his face were there, and they all snapped shut with 1 deep breath in from his nose and the thumbing of his cheek. Fuck. "Just so you know, I'm going to kill you," Raelius assured with a point. "I want to know how you're not afraid first." I didn't answer. My mind was too busy rewiring my questions and uncertainty to find a way out of this. I glanced side to side, but kept my looks mostly on him as he walked towards me with the blade in hand, flat side over his shoulder, shaking his head at me. My gaze remained the same. He was now angrily beside himself. "I can feel fear. I can sense weakness. You, there's nothing. You can't kill me, you can't beat me, yet for some reason, there isn't a shred of fear or dread in you. Why?" I kept my aim up, slowly taking steps backward without a word. Eyes glared back right at him, unyielding at him even if it was only indifferent defiance. "I don't even know myself. Neither of us will get an answer. Either way, you can go fuck yourself." Raelius slowly shook his head some more, disbelief overtaking him. It was like he couldn't comprehend what he was seeing or hearing in me. He seemed to fight with himself, pacing back and forth a few paces across the street, pointing at me at times, my aim following him regardless of confusion and anger changing prominence on his face every few seconds. "Okay, and I have a really great idea. I like you, really. I do. So you get something special. You believe in monsters, human. I've known a few. Then maybe this monster be more to your liking. Dokugumon." At first, nothing happened. But from on high, the sound of what started like a demented sigh turned out to be an increasing roar, until a bulbous form landed right behind Raelius with a ground-waving thud. A large being the size of an off-road pickup truck rose up now from its landing stance. This one was a smooth bulb, but still the pointed, haired-adorned rear second shape. A painted skull and bone seemingly painted on the shell, and it reared up. Large tubes of limbs flared out, the hairs long and spiked on it, 8 of them. A churning sensation of what could not possibly be was right there in front of my very eyes as they went wide as they ever had been. As the master arachnid face, along with jutting horns to the side and glassy green eyes, 8 of them all, popped out from behind Raelius's back. A yawned open, wide-fanged mouth in a roar with 2 mandibles flaring out, its front legs having 3-fingered claws with armored gauntlets over them, reaching up in curled clawed fingers. Standing 8 feet tall behind Raelius, as he stepped aside to showcase his summoned monster.
Can you do me a favor? Drain every drop of blood out of his body for me.
The monster's eyes showed my reflection as it lowered itself to pounce, a guttural laugh coming out of it letting me know what a voice of hell sounds like. Its tubular feet pads scratched the ground. One thing did come to mind. Next time I'm taking the cab all the way home. End of Chapter 1. All music provided by Facilian Studios. Narration done by Jackson Kane. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe for more Digimon Protector content and updates.